Hello and welcome to another lecture of Government and Politics. I am Muhammad Tahmidul Islam, lecturer, Department of Law, World University of Bangladesh, and this lecture has been produced as part of the online learning system of the World University of Bangladesh. So today we're going to talk about political theories, part 1, Anarchism, Authoritarianism, and Communism. So our topics are threefold. We are gonna first talk about anarchism, and secondly we're going to talk about authoritarianism, and lastly we're going to discuss on communism. First, anarchism. The word anarchism is derived from the Greek word anarchos, meaning without authority. So from this word we can understand that anarchism stands for a governmental system without any kind of authority or any kind of big brother type of system. The history of anarchist political theory is as old as the human civilization. In the beginning, people lived in decentralized tribal societies where there was no centralized and formal political authority. So if we look at the historical background of the politics, we will see that in the beginning, when people were only focused on survival, they had to rely upon themselves and their families only, and they kind of lived a very independent type of life, and their lives were actually dictated by their own rules, their own family rules, regulations, etc., and they were not controlled by others. So anarchism actually advocates for that type of lifestyle where people are living in different groups, and the groups have different rules, and they are not coerced into submission by any central authority. However, as time went on, people settled down to create cities, giving rise to an established political entity which not only demanded but also forced unquestioned submission from the citizens. So when the agricultural system was developed, people started to settle on villages and cities, and they created a hierarchy of politics. And in that hierarchy, people with influence started to gain power, and they used their influence and power to exploit others from their resources. So anarchism actually sees that as an inherent evil act and advocates against it. Anarchism rose as a challenge to this form of governance. Anarchism is a political philosophy that advocates for societies without governments. The philosophy of anarchism actually advocates for a society which is not run by a government but by the people themselves. Anarchism sees governments as coercive entities that cause wars, violence, repression, and misery, and thus calls for their abolishment. So the history of government, if you look at it, we will see that it is filled with good things, but it is also filled with really bad things. The world wars and many other regional wars were fought between states and governments, and due to the governmental disagreements, many innocent lives were lost who had no other affiliation or no other type of dispute among themselves except for their allegiance to a particular country or a particular state or a particular government. So anarchism actually sees that collectivism as an evil act, and it says that just because a certain group has a lot of power, it doesn't mean that they have the authority to control individual people. Anarchism is a principle or theory of the conduct under which society is conceived without a government, harmony in such a society being obtained not by submission to law or by obedience to an authority, but by free agreements conducted between the various groups, territorial and professional, freely constituted for the sake of production and consumption, as also for the satisfaction of the infinite variety of needs and aspirations of a civilized being. Russian philosopher and historian Peter Kropotnik. So Russian philosopher Peter Kropotnik has actually defined the philosophy of anarchism very well, and he said that Anarchist principle is actually based on free will and free association. People have the will to do whatever they want and live their lives in whatever way they would deem practicable, and the state or the government has no say in their lives. So this is the core principle of anarchist philosophy. Anarchists see the means of controlling the human population as innately corrupt and dehumanizing, because they believe that all human beings are equal and they do not require masters to enslave them. So anarchist theory is actually against slavery. It's actually against the ruling of other people by a special group of people who has all the power. So anarchist theory says that every human being are equal. So in that perspective, no other people can rule others. So anarchist principle says that there can be no ruler and there can be no ruled. The anarchist political theory has been experimented with in many regions of the world. Some has failed and some remains still. It is highly unlikely that anarchism is going to become a major political force in the near future. However, its ideas about government tyranny, along with the emphasis on freedom for all people, are thought-provoking. So, anarchist principle is not really a successful political theory because it has not been widely implemented in the world. We are not seeing a state which actively practices anarchist political theory, because in the system where the world is run by centralized governments and states, in that system anarchist societies cannot live peacefully, and anarchist societies cannot actually survive because other states will encroach upon those societies and enslave them. So in that case, anarchist society is quite impossible to implement in a state system of the world. So now let's talk about authoritarianism. So authoritarianism is actually a political system where the power of governance is concentrated in the hands of a person or a family or a small group of elites who exercise monopoly over state power and who has the ultimate say in all matters related to the state. So authoritarianism is actually a crude form of governance which has been in existence for a long time. We have seen the chieftains or the village rulers, and then they transformed themselves as kings, and those kings have now become presidents and prime ministers. But authoritarian principle actually states that the power of the ruling class must be controlled by a small group of people, and they should have all the power. Authoritarianism is based on obedience. It generally thrives in cultures where obedience to the elders is regarded as a virtue. So, in many cultures, obedience or blind obedience is a norm. And in those cultures, we see that the governmental system is also based on blind obedience and unquestioned following. And authoritarianism, in order to thrive, it needs blind obedience from the people. In an authoritarian political system, the people in power cannot be removed from their positions, even if the rulers often maintain a veil of political plurality and accountability. So, in an authoritarian country, we will see that there are elections happening, but those elections are farcical, they are not transparent, and they are not accountable to the people actually, even if they say that they are accountable, but the accountability actually does not exist in an authoritarian political system. And they will say that we have many parties and many political options to choose from, but in actuality people have little to no option to choose parties. Civil liberties like the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to a fair trial are almost non-existent in an authoritarian political state. So authoritarian system actually tries to control the people in such a way that they do not possess the power to think for themselves or to speak their mind or to actually have a fair trial in a court of law. So they control the press, they control the media, they control the narrative, and they actually control the mind of their people. Authoritarian leaders rule the people by means of fear, deceit, and thus false hope of prosperity. So, if you look at authoritarian states or authoritarian political system, we'll see that the rulers are charismatic, they are very powerful, they seem very strong, and they use fear tactics against their oppositions, and they use deceit and false hope to the general people to keep them docile and to keep them, hoping for a better future. In states with moderate authoritarianism, government buys the public officials through monetary incentives and facilitates uh, so that they assist the rulers to stay in power in perpetuity. So authoritarianism can have moderate effect on a state, and if the authoritarianism is moderate in a country, we will see that in that country the ruler or the authoritarian ruler will try to bribe the public officials or bribe the chieftains or bribe the local landlords into submission and into obliging their rules and procedures so that they can actually stop any kind of rebellious activity from the general people who are being exploited by the authoritarian ruler. The most authoritarian state in the world currently is North Korea, which is run by the Kim dynasty. Its current dictator Kim Jong-un is the son of its previous dictator Kim Jong-il and the grandson of the founder of the family Kim Il-sung. So if you look at North Korea, it's such a poor country, such a it's in such a bad shape, and it is the most authoritarian country in the world, and it is run by a family dynasty, and currently its king or its president, they say, or the supreme leader is Kim Jong-un. Arab states like the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, KSA, or Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are ruled by monarchic authoritarian regimes. So these countries are also ruled by kings and rulers who are authoritarian and who actually suppress other voices and other voices of democracy. So now let's talk about communism. Communism is a political theory that advocates for a classless society and the abolishment of private property. So communism is the political idea that says that there should not be any class or any private property, because private property creates division among people, and that division creates the power struggle, and that power struggle creates instability in a society, and the society cannot prosper. The ideas of communism was first developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels when they published Communist Manifesto in 1848. So in 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they contributed in the main formation of the ideas of communism. Thus, Capital or The Capital is regarded as the core book of communism, which was written by Karl Marx. In a communist state, there is no private property. The state owns all property on behalf of the people and is responsible to distribute wealth equally among the citizens. So communist states are, it's a certain kind of state that says that there is no private property. You cannot hold any kind of land, building, any kind of industry on your own, by your own name. The state or the country owns everything, every land, every industry, every property, and you are only going to control this property on behalf of the state, and then you are only going to get not the profit but only just salary from your endeavor. Communism rejects class distinctions in societies and imagines a state where there is only one class of people working towards a common goal. So communism is actually a workers' ideology which says that people of the world are equal and they should not be divided by classes, different classes like the rich class, the ruling class, the clergy class, and the working class. So these class distinctions must not be in a proper society, and a utopian society or a communist society should have a classless system where every person is equal. Historically, communism was first applied in the former Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1970, which was led by Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin, one of the most prominent communists in the world. So he is one of the most prominent communists, and he actually led the Bolshevik Revolution in 1970, which actually ended the monarchic system of the Russian uh, kingdom and established the Russian Soviet Union, which was a communist state and which no longer exists because it failed in 1991. However, communist states did not see much success due to internal corruption and mismanagement, even though the idea is still popular among working class people. So, poor people, to the poor people, the ideas of communism is alluring. That it says that, yeah, you have to work for the state, you will get proper employment, you will get food and shelter and everything from the state. So it sounds alluring, it sounds very promising, but it just fails to deliver those because of the innate greed of the people who run the communist state. If you look at Cuba, if you look at Venezuela, we will see that they have also tried to apply communism. And even in North Korea, North Korea is a communist state, and look at the people living there. They're living in absolute poverty, and the ruling class and the ruling family is actually living a lavish lifestyle. The Kim Jong-un, the person running the North Korean country, has his own personal train which he uses to go to China and Russia. So from that we know that communist state, it has a good philosophy, but it does not have proper application, and it cannot be properly applied, because in order to properly apply it, it must be applied by computers, not human beings. So this is the end of the lecture. I hope you have understood the concepts that I have talked about in this lecture. And if you face any problem regarding understanding the lecture content, please feel free to ask in the comment section. I will answer accordingly. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you all in the next lecture.